AI is changing the pace of software development in a way no technology has done before. What used to take weeks now happens in hours and sometimes even in minutes. Love says that all organizations, from startups to banks and governments, are racing to adapt AI. But traditional security processes and manual controls are struggling to keep up. A recent study I came across shows that 31% of companies consider AI security expertise to be their biggest shortcoming. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I am your host, Priya Dialani. Now, for decades, cybersecurity programs relied on human speed response, fragmented tools, and reactive monitoring. But with the advent of AI, it has significantly disrupted this model. And data shows a growing mismatch between machine driven attacks and human limited defense, which creates operational risk even when security tools are in place. Let's welcome Nitin Varma, Managing Director, India and SAARC at Saviynt, to discuss identity security in this new AI era and why it is the new frontline of cybersecurity and enterprise transformation. Hi, Nitin. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Priya. Great to be here.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today, Nitin. And of course, when you talk about cybersecurity, there are different verticals involved in it, and it's a very diverse field or a landscape, I would say. And I think identity management is one of the most sometimes I feel often overlooked aspect of cybersecurity, but somewhere down it plays a very important role. And I think we are going to learn more about it in our conversation today. So before we dive deeper into it, let's let our listeners understand about Saviynt, its specialization, and alongside that, a little bit more about you, Nitin. How has your journey been till date, and what's your role at the company today?
Absolutely. I think this is a good icebreaker. Thanks for that question, Priya. I think any Savientian can go on and on if you ask him or her to talk about Savient, but I'll try to keep it crisp and precise. So Savient, when you look, Priya, it's fundamentally an identity security and governance platform company, which specializes in governing who can act inside your enterprises and who can get access to enterprise systems, applications, and data. And what makes, and this is as per me, what makes Savin particularly relevant today, talking to various CISOs and business leaders in the India market, what makes Savin particularly very relevant today is that the entire platform that Savin has today was built, or is built rather, in a cloud first, AI first, and governance centric approach. Now, this is very different than the legacy IAM architecture that the market has seen for many, many years. Since you asked me about the specialization, there's no one specialization that I can just call about Savin, but I would rather put it in this way that its Savint's core specialization sits at the intersection of identity governance and administration, privilege access management, application access governance, non-human and AI identity security that you just mentioned, right? So that's the specialization I believe Savint has today. And one of the biggest, and I think the strongest strength in Savint for Savint is its converged platform, which is built grounds up. Now, we haven't been a toolchain integrator where we build the platform by acquiring different companies, but everything here in Savint, the entire platform, which is the AI native platform, has been built grounds up in here. That basically means for the customer, one console, and you get the context of each and every user and application there, right? So the platform basically does one thing, which is very, very important. Instead of treating governance, privileged access, and compliances at separate silos, it brings them together into a single identity control plane. I think I often use this analogy, Priya, that if data is the new oil, identity is becoming the refinery control system. And that's the space Savin specializes in. You asked me about my role in here, right? So I think, as you said, I'm the SVP and Managing Director of Savint for India and SAARC region. From a responsibility perspective, me and my team, I think responsibility sits at the intersection of customers, partners, strategy, and identity security. In my role, I'm responsible for driving Savint's growth strategy and execution across the region, leading customer acquisition, commencing or starting, strengthening the ecosystem and consulting partnerships, and definitely expanding the company's position in identity security market across India and SAARC. But the goal and the objective and the philosophy that we drive as a mission, right, as a team is very simple. How do we solve a problem for our customers around identity? So that's the mission, that's the philosophy that we work with and lead with in India and SAARC. I hope that answers the question, Priya.
Definitely, Nitin. And I think that's a really strong foundation to begin with because it gives our audience a clear understanding of not just what your organization does, but also the larger vision driving it forward. And I think our listeners will are really would be glad to understand about the perspective that you have shared on specialization and how Savient is focusing on solving specific industry challenges that tend to create the most meaningful value.
Absolutely.
So, with that context in place, let's take a deeper dive into, the security landscape. Now, with AI, definitely now we're going to witness it is going to become more deeply embedded into enterprise ecosystems. So, the conversation around security is evolving again very rapidly. We are no longer talking about protecting networks and endpoints because today organizations are dealing with intelligent systems that can generate content, make decisions, and even interact with customers in real time.
Mhm.
What's fascinating here is that AI is playing both roles here. It's becoming one of the most powerful tools for strengthening cybersecurity while simultaneously introducing an entirely new attack surface as well. So, how is the security landscape, shifting in this era which is driven by AI? And is the current security getting magnified or new risks are being introduced?
It's a very valid statement that you made, right? Question also is nice, Priya, but I think a very valid statement where I think there are two factors influencing the cybersecurity. One, I think the AI is transforming the cybersecurity by getting embedded, automating things, making systems more intelligent. Second, AI also, I think, is introduced as a new identity risk. I think absolutely valid statement that you just made, Priya. When I talk about the security landscape shifting, right, in the AI era, so let me try and put it from a lens of customers, regulators, or the partner, because these are the one who really matters to us today, right? When you talk to customers or the regulators or the partners today, Priya, right, they don't just want technology that just works. They want to trust that it's secure, it's compliant, and it's accountable. Very important in this AI era. Right? I think you also kind of alluded to that same statement. AI today has fundamentally shifted the conversation from purely technical risk to ethical and governance risk, right? What I mean by that here is, when you look at traditional digital transformation, 15 years back, 12 years back, sometime when the whole digital journey started with the advent of cloud and mobile, so on and so forth, right? The traditional digital transformation, we were worried about uptime, right? The green light should be on, right? Security and compliance with standards. That's about it. With AI coming into scene, the focus expanded to bias, explainability, and accountability. So we need, I think it's not enough for anyone to ask just, is the system secure? But also, we need to ask, is it fair? Is it transparent? And who is responsible when something goes wrong? Now, that to me elevates compliance from a legal tick box or a check box to a question of trust and reputation. Because in this digital or an AI era, everything is about trust and reputation here. So that's how I think I see the landscape, security landscape shifting in this AI era, right? From an ethical and governance standpoint, and just not the technical side.
Right.
Since you mentioned, has AI kind of magnified the existing risks? Definitely yes. They've not just added new risks that I just mentioned, it's magnified the existing ones, especially around data and identity. Now, why I say that is because when you look at the whole AI landscape today, right, there are systems, and you mentioned AI agent, autonomous agents, right, workflows, so on and so forth. These systems learn from and act on sensitive information of enterprises, which basically means knowing exactly who has the access, who trained the model, who can change its output is very, very critical. Now, this is where a strong identity management and access governance turn those abstract AI risks into something that we can measure, we can monitor, and ultimately comply with. So that's where I think the whole security landscape is going through that shift in this AI era.
Right, Nitin, and I think that's a very important point that you have brought out. That definitely, when you talk about AI, there's a dual reality where it is also considered, one of the most powerful tools to combat, but simultaneously, it's also, the biggest accelerator of cyber risk. And
Absolutely.
I think
And
I,
it's two end of spectrum, if you see, right? And that's what
yeah,
I say, right? There are
right,
two end of spectrum. AI is helping, and AI is also emerging as a risk. And
yes.
these two forces are converging very, very strongly and simultaneously, if you see around.
Right, right. And I agree with your point that, the scenario kinds of raises a larger conversation
Mhm.
around trust and, responsible AI adoption, because organizations today are not just protecting the systems anymore. It's important that, they're protecting the data integrity, digital identity,
Absolutely.
and ultimately the customer confidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Right.
Right.
And if you see the DPDP is all around that,
Yes. Yeah.
right? When you talk about the Digital Personal Protection Act, Digital Personal Act, I think it's all around that. It's about the personal data, it's about the consent, it's about accountability, access control, so on and so forth. So that's where the data and identity gets magnified.
Right. And again, I think you also mentioned that, how identity management is becoming crucial, because I think one of the most important shifts in cybersecurity is the move from exploiting systems to exploiting identities.
Mm,
There has been a significant increase in malware-free attacks, and instead of breaking into systems, attackers are increasingly logging in using compromised credentials. So, I mean, identities have been, there for many years. But why
mhm.
is it getting evolved as a major threat in today in AI era?
All right. So, yeah, I think you said it right, Priya, that I think if you look around, there are various reports that I think I come across, right? People who talk about identity constitutes about 80%, 85%, 86% of the total breaches that happen today, right? Where as you rightly mentioned, the adversaries are leveraging the credentials to do a data breach or a ransomware, so on and so forth. It's a very interesting thing that you asked me right now, that why identity, which has been there for many years, is kind of becoming a major threat landscape in this AI era. I was in a forum last week in Mumbai, and all the speakers, right, like whether it's the OEM like us or the customers, started with one macro statement, if you will, right, that identity is the new perimeter. So let me start giving you an answer with the same statement that today identity is the new perimeter here, right? It has always existed. You're absolutely right. I think it has always existed in the past for, I think, many, many, many decades now, right? But what has really changed or shifted in this AI era is the scale, the speed, and the nature of those identities, right? What I mean by that here is traditionally, when you look at the identity risk was very, or largely was very human centric, right? The employees like you and me, right? The partners, right? And maybe the customers at times, right? These identities, right, were very deterministic. What I mean by that is they were very stable, right, predictable, and governed through a very structured process. Somebody will join in, a manager will approve the access, so on and so forth. Very deterministic identities. However, right, in this AI era, there are three fundamental shifts that are turning identity into a major threat surface. Right. The first one being the explosion of non-human identities today. Right. When you look at enterprises, from managing thousands, right, of humans or users to now managing millions of identities. Why million? Because now you have a new classes of identity that have been introduced over time. The APIs, the service account, the bots, the AI agents or the autonomous agents. And these identities often don't go through governance, right? They have excessive privilege. That means I think they are the most vulnerable pieces in an enterprise, and they are poorly tracked. So what it means here is the attack surface has expanded massively out here. The second one, so that's a scale. The second one is the speed of decision making. Right? If you look at traditional enterprises, the excess misuse required human intent, your and my intent and time to do something mischievous. Right now, AI systems can execute action instantly, chain decisions across systems at the same time, and they operate 24/7 at machine speed. So, what it means for enterprises today, a compromised identity is no longer a single point risk. It becomes a multiplier of risk at scale. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the third, which is the most important one, which I personally believe, is a shift from access to autonomy. One of the most important change that I think the enterprises are witnessing or the industry is witnessing, the access to autonomy. What I mean by that is identity today are just not logging in. They are actually making decisions. Decisions like approving workflows, triggering transactions, accessing sensitive data autonomously. So the question is no longer who has the access. The question is, what is this identity allowed to do on its own? So I think that is few reasons why I think identity has, which has been there for ancient time, is now evolving, right, as the control plane of the global threat landscape in here. Yeah,
Right, Nitin, and I think agree with you that identity has somehow become the new security perimeter because if an attacker can compromise an identity, they can often move across systems without triggering the conventional defenses. And again, it's important to understand that identity is no longer about usernames and passwords anymore. What we are seeing now is that with the advent of AI, the scale, speed, and sophistication of identity-based attacks has also fundamentally changed. So earlier, organizations were primarily protecting human users, but today, identities includes machines, API bots, autonomous agents, and the
exactly.
models that are interacting with each other. And
Correct.
with that in place, it's very important how we are validating these identities dynamically and ensuring that every human and non-human identity is governed intelligently.
Absolutely. And I think as you rightly said, I think today these identities are just not accessing. When I talk about the autonomous agents, right, they're making decisions. So the organization basically need to ensure that they enable decision attribution and not just access or authentication. Yeah, that's kind of changing. That's the shift that every enterprise is seeing today, witnessing today with the AI adoption. Absolutely right, Peter.
Right. And when we talk about India's digital journey, Nitin, I think it
Mm,
has been nothing short of phenomenal. In just over a decade, we have built one of the world's most dynamic digital ecosystems where citizens can pay, authenticate, and access services at the tap of a finger. Remote work
mm.
has become mainstream, cloud adoption is surging, and government services are increasingly becoming digital first. With the kind of a discussion we had in terms of identity management, how is Saviynt making an impact and relevance in identity governance and security?
Perfect. So I'll probably take a cue, I think, from the earlier question that you had, earlier discussion that we did about the nature of identities are changing, right? And as we kind of alluded and we kind of agreed upon that, the AI agents are becoming the actors or identity inside the enterprise. So the next logical question becomes, how do organizations operationalize identity governance at scale? Now, this is exactly the shift that the identity security industry is now responding to. Because organizations are realizing that the identity governance must evolve from that traditional access management to continuous security control plane, something that can manage identity across humans, machines, application, and now the autonomous AI agents as well. Yeah. So platform that can unify visibility, number one, governance, and real-time policy enforcement across this expanding identity landscape. And this actually is becoming the foundation to enterprise cybersecurity today. Right now, this is where I personally believe that Saviynt is actually making that relevance and impact in the identity industry by standing at the forefront of identity security transformation in this AI era. Why do I say that? Because at Saviynt, our philosophy is very, very simple. AI should not sit as just a feature layer on top of identity governance. It should be embedded across the entire identity life cycle of any identities. What I mean by that is from discovering an identity, right, to classifying that identity basis as tag, whether it's human, non-human, machine, AI agent, to classifying that opportunity, to continuous risk scoring, behavior analysis, and then compliance monitoring. And this is what I'm talking about across the identity landscape that the enterprise today have, right? Whether it's human, machine, third party, or the AI entity. So what Savint is actually, I think, creating or offering the customers today is by embedding AI directly into the platform, identity governance evolves from being reactive control to predictive governance and having a compliance first design rather than having alert fatigues in there. So that's how I think we are kind of creating that impact and relevance in the India market and globally as well. And that's why you see, I think the growth rate at which we have been growing in the last 4 years is phenomenal. I think one of the fastest growing identity company, right, in the industry today.
Thank you, Nitin, for that perspective. And we're really glad to understand the impact Saviynt is trying to make in the identity management space. And I think, when we look at the current threat landscape, enterprises are managing, thousands of identities, whether it's across cloud or remote workforces, third-party vendors. And like in the earlier response, we discussed machine identities. So the complexity has increased significantly, undoubtedly. So I think platforms like Savin can, provide, when they're providing visibility and intelligence and governance in a very unified manner. I think that's really important for modern enterprises to survive and mitigate certain risks that usually come with evolving threat landscape.
Absolutely, Priya. And I think one of the things that, I've always worked in my early assignments also in platform companies. I think when I look at Savient approach of having a platform around a comprehensive identity security platform, it is not only about consolidating the fragmented tools around identity. But I think one of the key mission, right, or outcome that we want to deliver to our customer is to have a strategic control, right, in this digital era, which is very, very important. Definitely, the consolidation is a subset, is a byproduct of that platform.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is what I think Savint actually is delivering for our customers today with the platform approach.
Right. And I think that makes very much sense considering that, how more and more organizations are modernizing their legacy identity systems and, they're moving to the cloud. And
Mhm,
their migrations aren't deployed to a single cloud either. A recent survey revealed that 66% of enterprise companies use three
mhm,
or more clouds. So it's pretty clear centralizing is out, distributed multi cloud is in. But
mhm.
this new world again then begs the question that how do you manage identity in multi-cloud? Because multi-cloud strategy, of course, offers advantages which can help maximize resilience and provide the best services. But again, it is also plagued with significant challenges, especially when it comes to identity and access management. So,
Mhm.
how do you think organizations can operationalize identity across these complex multi-cloud setup?
Valid. I think great question, Priya. I'm just thinking if it's only around multi-cloud, it is hybrid. Because I think what makes it more complex, not just a multi-cloud, and this is my experience, this is my, what I've witnessed talking to many business leaders in the market. I think it gets even more complex, right? One, if they have multi-cloud, plus they have a hybrid, but there are many applications, right, that you cannot take it to cloud. So it's a very hybrid environment with multi-cloud playing, one more player there, right? So definitely, as you rightly said, I think it gets complex with this hybrid environment, right? The couple of things that I personally believe, and I'll try to keep it short, right? The organization basically need to do. I think from an identity standpoint, when you look at, I think they need to have a unified control plane. Why? One, to discover the identities wherever it is, whether it's in platforms like the multi-cloud setup, or maybe platforms like Vertex or Bedrock, AWS Bedrock, so on and so forth, right? So it's very important to discover the identities, right? The human, non-human, the various kind of identity that an enterprise might have, right? So one, I think with unified control plane, it's easier for us to discover, register those identities, and most important, monitor those identity in real time across these diverse environment, whether it's legacy, whether it's on-prem, whether it's cloud, whether it's platforms like Bedrock, ServiceNow, so on and so forth, right? Now, this is where I think Savient enables this, the discovery, registration, and monitoring, continuous monitoring that too, by providing posture management, right, to eliminate the blind spots across these platforms. Number one, right? Second, from an operationalization perspective, right, it requires managing the full life cycle of each and every identity that an enterprise might have. What I mean by that is right from registering that identity to offboarding that identity. That's number two, right? The third one is the most critical, implementing a runtime authorization to monitor transaction in real time, which basically means blocking or flagging unauthorized communication on a real time basis. So this is where I feel, right, the organizations today, especially in a complex and a multi-cloud environment, like you said, they need to operationalize the identity by discovering it and then implementing the governance and the runtime authorization. That would be my take here, right, on how do organizations operationalize identity.
Right. And I think that makes very much sense, Nitin, because when we look at identity, it's no longer confined to a single network, right? Or a cloud or a user group. And as organizations continue to expand across hybrid or multi-cloud ecosystems, identity has effectively become the new control plane for security, access, governance, and user experience. And again, in a highly distributed environments, the challenge is not only scale, but it is also to ensure interoperability, compliance, and seamless user experiences without increasing the complexity.
Absolutely right.
Right. Okay, great. With that being said, Nitin, I think we have discussed a lot about identity management, how it is evolving, what are certain things organizations need to keep in mind, ensuring that their identity management is, aligned with the evolving cyber threats and cybersecurity landscape. One last question for you would be, how would you view the future of identity security, or what are certain trends you predict would take over the identity security management in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, Priya, I think even though I'm a security practitioner for almost a decade, I
Yeah.
think it'll be easier for me to predict the economy in the next 10 years than predicting cybersecurity. But I'll take a jibe at that, right? So let me see. I'm not sure if this will remain, but this is where I personally feel how identity will be seen in the future, how people will think about identity, right? I think what we said earlier was, I think identity becomes the security perimeter for sure. As you rightly said, the enterprises are kind of decentralizing infrastructures. That basically means a traditional perimeter network or endpoint is kind of fading there, right? Security will no longer be about where you are, but it's who you are and what you can access. That's number one thing that I personally think that how identity will evolve in the future. The second one would be from human identity to entity identity. Now, with the explosion of machine identities, API, AI agents, the non-human identities will outnumber the humans by orders of magnitude, right? Which basically means the future of identity will not be human. It's everything that can act inside the enterprises, right? And that's what I said, I think, earlier in our discussion, that Saviynt determines who and what can act inside your enterprise. So that's where the future of identity will be. It's not going to be human, but everything that can act inside an enterprise. The third prediction, if I may, would be the rise of autonomous identity, which is the AI agents, right? Identity will no longer be passive or predictable. They will make decisions, they will trigger workflows, access system independently. So the shift that we would see in identity landscape, right, would be from access control to decision control. Right? That's where the decision attribution comes from. The fourth, I definitely think that from predictable or a periodic governance, it will move to continuous and real-time governance, right? The static roles like humans will disappear, the periodic reviews will disappear. The access now will be context aware, risk based, continuously evaluated, right? So the concepts like zero trust, least privilege principle will come into being, right? So, in a sense, what I mean by that is the access won't be granted once, it will be evaluated constantly and continuously. Right. And last but not the least, I think the convergence of identity platforms. You cannot have siloed approach, especially as the landscape of identity is evolving across the enterprises, right? So you cannot have a separate tool for IGA, separate tool for PAM, compliance, a separate tool. It will all converge into a platform, right? Which will help them consolidate. And like I said earlier, it will give the strategic control to the customer, right? So the thing that we would see in identity in future would be that you cannot secure identity in silos anymore. So that's what I believe as some of the future predictions in identity. So I think I'll end up with that statement here. The future of cybersecurity will not be decided by how well you manage an identity, right? But it will be decided by how well do you balance productivity, security, and compliance by leveraging a platform approach. So that's what I think about the future of identity here. But happy to hear from you if you have some um, key insights around this as well.
No, I think I agree with you, Nitin, because when we talk about autonomous agents and the real-time governance, I think they will definitely take over the dominance, I believe, in the coming years, because I think it's really important and it's really needed, I feel, considering how the industry is evolving and the kind of threats we are witnessing. But I think the winners beyond 2026 will be the organizations that treat identity as a very critical infrastructure. And
Sure.
if you're building your identity security strategy for the coming years, the best time to simplify, converge, and modernize is now, before complexity becomes the breach again. So, Nitin, I think that was an incredibly insightful discussion. And I think one of the strongest takeaways from today's conversation is that identity is no longer just a security layer that is operating in the background. It has become the foundation of modern digital transformation. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for joining us and sharing your perspectives. And if there's anything else you would want to add.
Well, I think a few things that I think I've observed in the last 15 months of my role and job here. I think that's something which I'll probably like to share, right? And this is again by talking to many leaders around. So I think when you look around the shift here, right, that we have witnessed in the last 2 decades, right, like internet and mobile and cloud, and now I think a shift that can that gives ability to us to create and manufacture intelligence at a click of a button. Every shift has created or transformed leaders or winners. Why I say that is because when you look around, cloud transformed the infrastructure, mobile transformed the platforms, and AI now will transform the enterprise operations. So in this new era, like you rightly said, identity will become the foundational security layer. And because every AI system, every application, and every automated workflow ultimately interacts through identity. So, at one side, while AI will amplify everything in your enterprise, it will also amplify the control gaps. The question I think that the industry is today is answering it, that will we lead the shift or will react to it? So that's the question I'll like to leave the audience and you with right now.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for those insights and sharing your experiences with our audience today. It was a truly valuable conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Priya.
And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Stay connected with us for more conversations with industry leaders shaping the future of technology, AI, cybersecurity, and enterprise innovation. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.